Hey guys, we're gonna keep the intro short because we've got 30 teams to get through here. So really, all I want to say is that when making this list, I tried to avoid guys that failed because of injuries as much as possible. Because I don't want my busts to have excuses. I want them to have everything going for them and still be horrible. Last quick note, just in case you don't stick around until the end, if you like the video, subscribe for more NBA content. And now, let's jump into the biggest bust for every single NBA team. The Atlanta Hawks select Marvin Williams. Headed into the 2005 draft, the Hawks needed a point guard, so first team All-American Chris Paul looked like an easy selection for the franchise to make. Instead, the Hawks passed on future Hall of Famer Paul and future All-Star Deron Williams to take Marvin Williams with the second overall pick. Even though Marvin was a player who was deemed not good enough to start for his own college team at North Carolina. So yeah, even though Marvin eventually grew into a starting caliber player in his NBA career, again, the Hawks desperately needed a point guard, and they passed on Chris Paul. At the time, everyone thought this was a dumb move, and everyone was right. The Boston Celtics select Kendrick Brown. The Boston Celtics have a long record of drafting future Hall of Famers, but every now and then, no matter how good you are, sometimes you're going to fail, which was definitely the case in the 2001 draft, when with the 11th pick, the Celtics took Kendrick Brown, a man who would only last 4 years in the NBA and retired with a career 3.6 point per game average. Now, this was certainly a miss of a draft pick, but to make matters even worse, at the time, the Celtics owned the Denver Nuggets draft pick and could choose to use it in 2001, 2002, or 2003. They chose 2001 and picked the bust that is Kendrick Brown, when they could have waited until 2002 or 2003 and potentially seen players such as Amari Stoudemire, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, or Chris Bosh in a Celtics uniform. Ouch. The Brooklyn Nets select Dennis Hobson. In 1987, the Nets were coming off a 24-58 season and held the 3rd overall pick. With this pick, they could have taken future Hall of Famers Scottie Pippen or Reggie Miller, or future All-Stars Kevin Johnson, Horace Grant, Reggie Lewis, or Mark Jackson. Instead, they chose Dennis Hobson, who at the time did look great. I mean, he averaged an awesome 29 points per game during his senior season at Ohio State, but once he arrived in the NBA, Hobson would never quite live up to his college hype. While he did lead the Nets in scoring in the 1990 season with 15.8 points per game, overall, Hobson was seen as a massive disappointment, and he would finish his NBA career after just 5 seasons. The Charlotte Hornets select Adam Morrison. 2006 was the year Michael Jordan became a part owner of the then Charlotte Bobcats, which meant many thought it wouldn't be long before Mike's championship pedigree rubbed off on his new team. The many people who thought this were quickly proven horribly wrong, when in his first draft as an owner, Jordan selected college star Adam Morrison with the 3rd overall pick over Rudy Gay and Brandon Roy, the 2 players the rest of his front office wanted him to take. Again, this was a pretty terrible decision, as Morrison played in just 4 years in the NBA and left the league with career averages of 7.5 points and 2.1 rebounds, making him one of the worst 3rd overall picks in the history of the NBA. The Chicago Bulls select LaMarcus Aldridge, then trade for Tyrese Thomas. In the 2006 draft, the Bulls had the 2nd overall pick and nailed it when they drafted LaMarcus Aldridge out of the University of Texas, except the Bulls front office decided they saw more value in the supposedly raw and potential-filled Tyrese Thomas, and they traded the man they had already taken, the future All-Star LaMarcus Aldridge, to the Blazers for the 4th overall pick, Tyrese Thomas. Thomas would end up playing 8 years in the NBA and averaged just 7.7 points and 4.8 rebounds a game, while again, All-Star LaMarcus Aldridge is still playing with career averages of 19.1 points and 8.3 rebounds. So while in their franchise history, Tyrese Thomas wasn't the worst player the Bulls drafted in the lottery, when you draft an all-star and then immediately trade him for a career role player, well, that pretty much automatically becomes the biggest bust in your franchise's history. The Cleveland Cavaliers select Anthony Bennett. Now, to be fair, the 2013 draft wasn't the greatest draft in NBA history, as so far Giannis has been the only player taken to become an NBA All-Star, and Giannis was certainly not seen as a potential top selection at that time. With that said, the Cavs surprised everyone when they took Anthony Bennett at number 1, as many mock drafts had Bennett going as low as number 8. But Cleveland thought they had their guy, and in the process, they passed up on some solid players such as CJ McCollum, Victor Oladipo, Otto Porter, and Nerlens Noel, just to name a few. Any of those players would have been real assets on the current Cavs roster, while Bennett, well, he's been one of the worst number 1 overall picks in the history of sports in general. As in his 4 years in the league, Bennett averaged just 4.4 points per game and has shown such little potential that this year he was cut by the Nets D-League team and a EuroLeague team within the span of a few months. So I don't think we're going to see Anthony Bennett in the NBA anytime soon, but make sure to keep an eye out for him at your local YMCA tryout, where I'm sure he'll also be cut. The Dallas Mavericks select Samaki Walker. In 1996, the Dallas Mavericks were looking to add another post presence to complement their 3-star Jays, Jason Kidd, Jamal Mashburn, and Jim Jackson. They held the 9th overall pick in a draft that held 10 future All-Stars, but somehow they decided to take Samaki Walker, a 6'9" power forward out of Louisville. This was possibly the biggest mistake the Dallas Mavericks ever made, and that's saying a lot, as remember, Dallas let future 2-time MVP Steve Nash sign with the Suns in free agency because they didn't think he was worth the money he was asking for. As for Samaki, he was taken just spots before future MVPs Kobe Bryant and, coincidentally, Steve Nash. Walker was also selected ahead of stars Peja Stojakovic, Jermaine O'Neal, and Zydrunas Ilgauskas. Any of those players could have cemented a future Mavericks dynasty when paired with Dirk Nowitzki, but instead, Samaki Walker would stay with the Mavericks for just 3 seasons and would finish his NBA career with averages of 5.3 points and 4.7 rebounds a game. The Denver Nuggets select Raef LaFrentz. When looking back at the 1998 NBA draft, we find that the top 10 picks alone were loaded with talent. This top 10 held 3 future Hall of Famers in Vince Carter, Dirk Nowitzki, and Paul Pierce. It also held a future All-Star in Antoine Jamison, as well as future NBA starters Mike Bibby, Jason Williams, and Larry Hughes. None of these players were Raef LaFrentz, who did have a decent 10-year NBA career, but was certainly not a future Hall of Famer. On top of this, like a lot of these picks, this selection didn't make a whole lot of sense at the time, as the Nuggets desperately needed a wing player, but chose to pass on Vince Carter and Paul Pierce despite both players having standout collegiate careers. The Detroit Pistons select Darko Milicic. In 2003, Hall of Fame coach Larry Brown was hired by the Detroit Pistons to lead Chauncey Billups, Ben Wallace, and Rip Hamilton to the promised land. The year before, the Pistons had been swept by the Nets in the Eastern Conference Finals, and so they were now desperate to add the final piece to their championship puzzle. And wouldn't you know it, despite their success, the Pistons held the 2nd pick in possibly the greatest draft class of all time, as they held the rights to the Memphis Grizzlies selection that year. But somehow, Detroit managed to mess this up, as instead of taking Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, or Dwayne Wade, the Pistons took Darko Milicic, a raw prospect who they thought had the upside of an NBA star. Instead, Darko averaged just 1.6 points per game in his 3 years as a Piston and left us all with one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. What if Detroit took Melo, Bosh, or Wade? Would they have won 2 NBA championships? Could they have won 3? Sadly, we'll never know the answer. The Golden State Warriors select Joe Smith. In the grand scheme of his NBA career, Joe Smith has been known for a few things: having the most basic name in NBA history, being the most tradable player in NBA history, and being the Warriors' worst draft mistake of all time. As in 1995, Joe Smith was a 6'10" center out of Maryland when he was taken number 1 overall by Golden State. At the time, he was the consensus best talent in the draft according to scouts around the league, but that couldn't have been further from the truth, because the the next 4 picks alone produced future Hall of Famer and MVP Kevin Garnett, as well as future All-Stars Antonio McDyess, Rasheed Wallace, and Jerry Stackhouse. Joe Smith would never make an All-Star team, and just midway through his 3rd year in Golden State, the team gave up on him and traded him to the Sixers, marking the beginning of a long and mediocre journey through the NBA that saw him play for 12 different teams. Not exactly what you want when you're trying to take a franchise player. The Houston Rockets select Eddie Griffin. In 2001, the Rockets had acquired 3 total first-round picks and would select Richard Jefferson, Jason Collins, and Brandon Armstrong, which would have been a pretty good draft if they didn't trade all 3 of them to the Nets for the 7th overall pick, Eddie Griffin. Griffin was both a mediocre talent and unfortunately a horrible alcoholic, as after averaging 8.7 points and 5.8 rebounds in 2 seasons with the Rockets in his first 2 years, Eddie would be waived by the team after he missed the entire 2004 season after being admitted into rehab for alcohol abuse. From there, he would sign with the Timberwolves the following season as a free agent, but the off-court issues for Eddie Griffin would eventually prove to be fatal, as sadly, Eddie would die in a car crash while driving drunk. So everyone, just use this as a lesson. Please do not drive drunk. The Indiana Pacers select Rick Roby. After winning a coin flip that gave them the #1 pick in the 1978 draft, the Pacers tried desperately to convince Larry Bird to skip his senior year at Indiana State, but they were unsuccessful. So Indiana decided to trade down to the 3rd pick, where they took Rick Roby out of the University of Kentucky, which would have been fine, but then with the 6th pick, the Boston Celtics went ahead and took none other than Larry Bird. Yup. Somehow, Red Auerbach was able to get the NBA's rules changed so that for a short time, teams were able to select a player even if he was going to play in college the next year, and as long as they signed that player in between the end of his college season and the start of next year's draft, they would be able to keep him. So the Celtics took Bird, signed him the next year, and watched as he led them to multiple NBA championships, while Roby, well, he would play in just 43 games as a Pacer before being traded in his rookie season to the Celtics. The Los Angeles Clippers select Michael Olowokandi. Don't need to spend much time on this one, as the Clippers made the same mistake as the Nuggets in the 1998 draft and missed out on Pierce, Carter, and Nowitzki, only the Clippers pick was slightly worse, as Los Angeles actually was drafting #1 in 1998 and took Michael Olowokandi, a man who was deemed uncoachable by basketball legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar after the Clippers hired Kareem to work on the Candyman's game. And yes, he was called the Candyman, which was pretty lame. The Los Angeles Lakers select Brad Holland. It's tough to believe that the Lakers would experience their biggest draft bust in the same draft that they selected Magic Johnson, but after taking Magic with the #1 overall pick in the 1979 draft, the Lakers held the 14th pick as well. There, they took local UCLA stud Brad Holland over future All-Stars Bill Laimbeer and Mark Eden. Holland would play in only 79 games in his 2 years with the Lakers and started a grand total of 0. Overall, he would last just 3 years in the league and retired with a career 3.2 point per game average, making him the absolute worst of the Lakers' very few lottery picks. The Memphis Grizzlies select Hasheem Thabeet. In 2009, the young Grizzlies had already began the process of forming the team that has been a staple in the Western Conference playoffs over the last 8 years. After acquiring Marc Gasol from the Lakers and Zach Randolph from the Clippers, the Grizzlies' front court was already set to be dominant, but that didn't stop Memphis from drafting Hasheem Thabeet with the 2nd overall pick in 2009. Now sure, NBA teams around the league were intrigued by Thabeet's high ceiling and shot blocking ability, but Hasheem was certainly seen as a very high-risk prospect, which is why it was really no surprise that in his 5 years in the league, he would average just 0.8 blocks and 2.2 points per game, which was bad, but to make things even worse, Hasheem was taken ahead of James Harden and Steph Curry when the Grizzlies could have used a shooting guard, giving us one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history, as well as one of the dumbest mistakes in NBA history. The Miami Heat select Michael Beasley. In 2008, the Miami Heat held the second pick in a draft that featured Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Love, Danilo Gallinari, Eric Gordon, and Brook Lopez, and they wound up with none of them. Instead, they selected a player who was supposed to be the second coming of Kevin Durant, as at times in his college career, Michael Beasley did look like a future NBA star, but unfortunately, work ethic and maturity issues would completely derail any NBA future Michael Beasley had. And quick thought here, has there ever been a more fitting nickname than Be Easy? Hey Mike, maybe if you took things a little less easy, you would have had a little more success in the NBA. Just saying. But alas, Beasley spent just 2 years in Miami before he was traded to the Timberwolves to make room for LeBron, and again, we're left with a pretty solid what if. Because if the Heat had taken Westbrook, Love, or really any of the names I mentioned above, then they would have had an even better team with LeBron, Bosh, and Wade, and they might have won an extra championship or two, and LeBron may have never left the Heat, and Cleveland would still be missing out on their first championship in a long time. But again, with these what ifs, we'll just never know. The Milwaukee Bucks select Kent Benson. In 1977, the Bucks had the #1 overall pick and wasted it on a guy whose career highlight was getting punched in the face by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That guy was Kent Benson, a man who excelled in Bob Knight's system at Indiana, but could never really put it together in his pro career. Still, Benson did average an okay 9.1 points and 5.7 rebounds a game for his career, but in a draft that held 8 future All-Stars, those numbers were just not good enough to avoid the label of bust. The Minnesota Timberwolves select Johnny Flynn. At one time in his life, Johnny Flynn was a human highlight reel at Syracuse. The man was known for his flashy passes, his incredible finishes, and many thought he was a future NBA All-Star. And so, with the 6th pick in the 2009 draft, the Timberwolves got sucked into the Johnny Flynn hype and drafted him 1 spot ahead of future 2-time MVP Steph Curry. What's even worse is the Timberwolves also held the 5th pick in this draft and took Ricky Rubio, which meant in back-to-back picks, the Wolves drafted 2 point guards and none of them were Steph Curry. So both the 5th and 6th pick here were bad, but Flynn was the real bust here, as Johnny would only play in 3 total seasons in his NBA career before leaving the league at the young age of 22. And yes, we have another awesome what if, because if Curry pairs up with Love in Minnesota, then Kevin never would have been traded to the Cavs, the Warriors would not have been NBA champions in 2015, and yeah, recent NBA history would certainly have been rewritten. Instead, at least we've got Towns and Wiggins. The New Orleans Pelicans select Hilton Armstrong. Now, in their relatively short time as a franchise, the Hornets/Pelicans have not experienced too much failure in the draft. But with that said, in the 2006 draft, the then Hornets held the 12th and 15th pick and didn't use either on future All-Star point guards Rajon Rondo and Kyle Lowry. Instead, they drafted 2 guys, Hilton Armstrong and Cedric Simmons, who would combine to average just 5.2 points and 4.5 rebounds per game. Not great. The New York Knicks select Jordan Hill. The 2009 season saw the Knicks miss the playoffs, which wasn't a surprise. What was a surprise was they actually owned their first-round pick. So with that #8 pick, New York targeted Steph Curry, and because they're the Knicks, they had to watch as Steph was taken 1 pick before them. So as a consolation prize, the Knicks took Jordan Hill, who would go on to become one of the least productive lottery picks the league has ever seen. The Knicks realized early just how bad Jordan Hill was, and so they traded him to the Rockets after just 24 games, which was actually a pretty savvy move for the Knicks, because Hill would go on to average just 1.7 points and 2 rebounds a game for his entire career. And of course, as we know, the worst busts in history are both terrible and have All-Stars picked after them, and picked after Hill were All-Stars DeMar DeRozan, Drew Holiday, and Jeff Teague. Knicks fans, I'm just so sorry. The Oklahoma City Thunder, then Seattle Supersonics, select Scottie Pippen, then trade him for Olden Polynice. Again, when you draft a future star, then trade him for a much worse player, you deserve bust bonus points. And with the 5th pick in the 1987 draft, the then Seattle Supersonics took future NBA Hall of Famer Scottie Pippen only to trade him for Olden Polynice. So with this trade, the Bulls got the wingman they needed for Michael Jordan, and the Sonics got a man who would be arrested twice for impersonating a police officer. And yeah, Seattle could have had Gary Payton, Scottie Pippen, Pippen and Shawn Kemp on the same team in their primes, which, when you account for the Bulls losing Pippen, had to be worth at least one championship, right? The Orlando Magic select Stephen Hunter. Now, the Magic have not had too many busts in their short run as a franchise, and it also seems likely that in a few years Orlando's biggest draft bust will be Mario Hezonja. But we're going to give Hezonja a few more seasons to prove himself, so for now, we're going to journey to the 2001 NBA draft, where with the 15th pick, the Magic passed on Zach Randolph and instead chose Stephen Hunter, a big man who averaged just 3.5 points and 2.5 rebounds in 3 years with the Magic before he was traded to the Cavaliers, who cut him because he was clearly not good enough to be on a playoff caliber team. The Philadelphia 76ers select Evan Turner. Now, Evan Turner hasn't been the worst basketball player on this list, but he still has been a pretty big failure for the second overall pick in the 2010 draft, especially when as a junior he was named as college basketball's player of the year, especially because 3 current all-stars, DeMarcus Cousins, Paul George, and Gordon Hayward, were taken after him. But to be fair, if the Sixers hadn't whiffed on their second pick in 2010 and taken one of the 3 players I just named, well, we may have been deprived of the process, because it's likely that Philly would have been a playoff staple with Drew Holiday, Andre Iguodala, and someone like DeMarcus. So if Joel Embiid stays healthy, Sixers fans really aren't going to mind this. The Phoenix Suns select William Bedford. William Bedford is a cautionary tale and one of the reasons the league now has such a strict screening process for its draft prospects. Because with the 6th pick in 1986, the Suns took Bedford and watched as a clear behind-the-scenes drug problem emerged. Billy would play in just 50 games with the team before he was traded, and he would go on to miss his entire 3rd season in the league as he was forced to go to rehab. And unfortunately, these drug problems would never really go away, as after his forgettable 6-year NBA career, Bedford was arrested 5 times for drug-related offenses and eventually was given a 10-year jail sentence. The Portland Trailblazers select LaRue Martin. Before Anthony Bennett became our generation's worst #1 pick of all time, we had LaRue Martin. As in the 1972 draft, the Trailblazers selected LaRue Martin #1 overall and watched as the big man lasted a grand total of 4 years in the league and retired with 1,422 points for his career. Meanwhile, Bob McAdoo, who was picked after Martin in that year's draft, scored 1,441 points in just his rookie season. So yeah, LaRue Martin was a pretty terrible pick for the Blazers, but despite this, they still won the 1977 championship and almost repeated the next year until Bill Walton got hurt, which means if Portland had taken Bob McAdoo or Julius Erving, the 2 Hall of Famers available in this draft, it's very possible the 1978 title would have went to Portland as well. The Sacramento Kings select Jimmer Fredette. So many names to choose from here, but we landed on Jimmer because at BYU, Fredette captured America's hearts with his incredible range and shooting ability. And so the Kings traded down in the 2011 draft and took Jimmer with the 10th pick, ahead of no names such as Klay Thompson and Kawhi Leonard. Jimmer has since become a Chinese basketball legend, while Klay and Kawhi have, well, they've won NBA championships. Kings fans, I feel your pain. I'm not gonna pile on here. The San Antonio Spurs select Alfredrick Hughes. The Spurs are one of those teams that has not had a ton of high draft picks, but in the 1985 draft, a draft that saw 9 All-Stars taken in the 1st round and 3 taken after the 14th pick, San Antonio selected Alfredrick Hughes with pick number 14. They could have had Joe Dumars, AC Green, or Terry Porter, but instead they took a man who played just 1 season in the NBA before he was cut. And yeah, I'm sure if Pop was coaching back then Hughes would be in the Hall of Fame right now. But for once, San Antonio actually made a mistake, so let's just all celebrate this special day. The Toronto Raptors select Rafael Arazu. Going into the 2004 draft, the Raptors still had Vince Carter and had just enjoyed a solid rookie year from Chris Bosh. So if they hit on their 8th pick, they could have been looking at a very promising young team. Instead, they chose Rafael ahead of Andre Iguodala, Al Jefferson and Josh Smith. This bust of a pick would be the final straw for Vince, as he officially demanded a trade in 2005 and was eventually moved to the Nets. And I've got to say, he had a pretty good reason to be fed up here, as Raphael played in just 3 seasons in the league before finishing his career with a 2.8 point per game average. The Utah Jazz select Jose Ortiz. The Jazz are another one of those teams that has not had a ton of high draft picks in their franchise history, and when they have had high draft picks, they've generally hit on them. So picking from a very short bust list here, we're going to go with Utah's 15th pick in the 1987 draft, where the Jazz took Jose Ortiz over guys like Mark Jackson and Reggie Lewis. This was a pick that was just ridiculous at the time, as Ortiz was both a 25-year-old rookie and terrible at basketball. He would play in just 2 seasons with Utah before retiring with just 391 minutes played for his entire career. And yeah, bonus points were definitely added for this man's age. If you take a 25-year-old and he still averages just 2.8 points per game in his rookie season, then you messed up. The Washington Wizards select Kwame Brown. Before the 2011 draft, the league had never seen a high school player taken with the first overall pick. That would change when the Wizards took the infamous Kwame Brown ahead of number 2 pick Tyson Chandler and number 3 pick Pau Gasol. Now, when this pick was first made, things looked like they would work out. During a press conference, Kwame swore to his team that he wouldn't let them down, and Michael Jordan, fresh off his second retirement, tried to take Kwame under his wing. But then, things took a turn for the worse, as Mike decided that Kwame was too soft of a man to ever be a good basketball player, so he decided to toughen Kwame up by embarrassing him whenever he possibly could. This led to Kwame Brown breaking down in tears in front of his teammates, and after some tough seasons with Jordan, he was never really the same. But hey, at least he made $64 million as a basketball player, so things weren't too bad. Hey, if you're still here right now, you are a real one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. Again, if you're not already subscribed, I really think if you love basketball, you'll love this channel, so subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, you are awesome. We all know this, so thank you, and as always, have an awesome day, and cue that music.
How it's supposed to feel.